Hello, friends. Welcome to the first actual week of lessons. Everything else was just kind of introduction to the class. Here's how stuff works. Here's your actual first lesson. Just in case you're concerned that I wear the same shirt every day, that's not actually the case. I just recorded all of these back to back to back to back in a long marathon of sitting in a room by myself. It's fun, I promise. Nobody's walked by and looked at me like I'm totally crazy yet. Alrighty, so without further ado, let's take a look at our first lesson, which is looking at a history of diversity in schools. I had this on here just from where I previously taught this class as a dual credit class. If you're ever trying to figure out how to cite research, by the way, this is my favorite method for doing it, which is point evidence analysis, which is an acronym of P, like this little book that my son loved called Little P. P stands for point, which is make the point that you want to discuss. E stands for evidence, cite some evidence to back up your point. A stands for analysis, give your analysis of whatever information it is that you're citing. So that's just kind of a general tip to using citations, just in case it's been a hot minute since you've cited something. As far as citation style goes in this class, I'm familiar with both MLA and APA. I don't care which one you use, just pick one and use it correctly. I can tell you that your education classes, like at university, if you transfer on from there, will probably all be in APA format. So if you'd like to practice APA with me, because I tend to be nice and try to help you through it, you're more than welcome to. You can also stick with MLA if it's more comfortable for you. As long as you're using a citation style, I'm a happy woman. So without further ado, we're going to take a historical look at diversity in schools, which kind of has some heavy topics in it, not going to lie. We haven't always been very equitable in terms of who we offer education to in America. So this isn't necessarily like the happiest lesson, although we've come a long way. So we have this line particularly here from the Declaration of Independence, right? That says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. And some of you are quoting Hamilton right now about including women in the sequel, but that's a totally different class. That they're endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the government, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it's the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute a new government, laying its foundation on such principles, and organizing powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. And that is, yes, the capitalization that was used by the founders, because back then capitalization was based on vibes, and you just capitalized what vibed with you. True story. Anywho, but if you take a look at this, it seems so promising, right? That everybody is created equal, that we all have rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But unfortunately, if you know anything about American history, you would know that we would put a little asterisk right here by all men, and we would change it to all white land-owning men that are like manly men, not including like mankind in general, which of course is the challenge, right? Is we haven't always had equity in the same way that we really kind of set out to do in the beginning. Now, what I really love about America is that we've been kind of able to evolve past that, and really, I feel like, even have a grander vision for our country than what the original founding fathers kind of envisioned for just that particular microcosm of society, which I like, right? Like, things got better. But if we're looking at kind of a brief overview of American history, American educational history, sorry, not full American history. That would take forever. We're just looking at a history of education in America. In the beginning, we had homeschool and private tutors, right? The first school in the first public school in America was the Boston Latin School, which was created in Boston, Massachusetts in 1635. Fun fact, that was a trivia question last semester, and I didn't get it right because it had been so long since I taught this class that I couldn't remember it. And I'm still kind of salty about that to this day. Now, the downside, of course, to the Boston Latin School is, as you can guess, is that it did not serve women. It did not serve basically anybody other than, your standard affluent white boys, but it did exist. Anybody else who was educated was receiving that education at home. As we kind of transition on, the Puritans would go on to basically open religious schools that would also teach basic skills, but they weren't mandatory. And neither was the Boston Latin School, right? Like, it was available if your parents wanted to send you to school, but it wasn't like, it wasn't like the truancy officer was going to come get you like they do nowadays. After the Revolution, Thomas Jefferson argues that we need free public education, and nobody else agrees with him. So good job, Thomas Jefferson, for being ahead of the game in that capacity of your life. After that, we have common schools, or what you would think of as the one-room schoolhouse, that become a little bit more common, more than just the Boston Latin School. We start to actually have a variety of schools available, but they're not free and they're not required. Horace Mann and his friends start advocating for free public education for all asterisk, of course, being not women and, white people specifically. And in 1852, Massachusetts, for the first time, mandates the first compulsory elementary education. So just grade school. And Massachusetts is like, you know what? We're going to force you to go this. And it goes well enough that in 1853, New York follows along. And by 1918, the rest of the nation has picked up, and we now have mandatory free education, elementary education. Okay. Compulsory does mean you are required to attend it, but that's only elementary education. In 1868, we have the 14th Amendment that's passed that finally actually, guarantees that we can't have slaves anymore. And actually, we have to start treating people more equally. Although, of course, segregation was still very much a thing at that point. And would be, unfortunately, for probably another century. In 1894, we have Plessy versus Ferguson, which is a Supreme Court case that upheld legal segregation. The idea was that they were offering separate but equal schools. Okay. So Plessy versus Ferguson requires that we still have to offer free public education to Black children, but it can be separate and equal, meaning that segregation is legally upheld. In 1904, Helen Keller breaks boundaries by becoming the first deaf-blind woman to graduate from college. And for the love of God, if you were one of those people who believe she didn't exist, let me remind you, deafness and blindness do go beyond being fully deaf and fully blind. I had a student who was blind who could read stuff who was on size 32 font as long as he held it at this particular angle from his face. So just to clarify, deafness and blindness go beyond what you think they are. In the early 1900s, we go through this Americanization phase of schools after World War I, where we start exclusively teaching in English and really focusing in on patriotism and U.S. history and things like that. In 1920, career tracking becomes popular. And basically what would happen is we would take the IQ test, which is a somewhat dubious metric of measuring intellect to begin with. And students who had lower IQ scores would be trained to go to work, and students who had higher IQ scores would be trained to go to college, which is dicey. In 1942 to 45, we have another very weird period of American history. Sorry, I think she was looking for someone, where Japanese students are forced into internment camps because, again, this is after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, right? Your average class sizes for elementary school were 48 kids to one teacher, high school 35 to 1. So not good situations there. In 1954, Brown versus Board of Education overturns Plessy v. Ferguson, which then makes segregation in schools illegal, which leads to a very contentious time period in American history. Now, you would think that we would have been, with it enough to go, oh, great, we're finally functioning. Unfortunately, we don't. And in 1957, 9 Black students in Little Rock enroll in an all-white school. And I feel like the best way to tell their story is to have you watch their story, okay? So do know that I would never force you to sit down and watch a documentary unless I thought it was actually really, really good. And in fact, I think this is the only lengthy video you have to watch in this class. But if you click, oh, sorry, where's my little drawer at? Hey, there it goes. But if you click right here on this link, it will take you to a website where you can watch the documentary Teach Us All. This was made in 2017, and it was about the Little Rock Nine. And this is a super important time in American history because I don't think people realize nowadays, because we have so much distance in time from the civil rights movement, how complicated the situation that the Little Rock Nine had to face was. These are children who were going to school, and the things they faced were really apprehensible. So what I want you to do is I want you to watch this documentary. You're going to write about it in your reflection journal, and it's also going to come up again in your discussion boards. So you are for sure going to need to watch it. So go in and do that. Okay. Like I said, I would not make you watch a video if I didn't promise it was super important. In 1964, heading back to our timeline here, we have the Civil Rights Act. In 1965, we passed the ESEA, or the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which was President Johnson, who basically founds the idea of schools as part of a war on poverty, right? If we have schools that are equitable and we serve poor neighborhoods better, then perhaps people can lift themselves out of poverty. is the mentality. In 1972, we passed Title IX to kind of mitigate gender discrimination so that we can quit telling girls they can't be part of sports and things like that. In 1975, the Individuals with Disabilities Act, or IDEA, was passed. And don't worry, we have a whole unit on that, so we're going to come back to that. In 1990, the ADA, or Americans with Disabilities Act, is also passed. That's Unit 2, so we're going to come back to that later. In 2001, the infamous No Child Left Behind was passed under President George Bush while I was a child, which is the reason you all have to take so many freaking standardized tests to this day. In 2015, Obama passes the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, which changed basically kind of the reporting metrics for how we, it made No Child Left Behind a little bit better. In 2017, in Illinois, we passed the Evidence-Based Funding Act, which was basically designed to help fund schools in impoverished areas. Previously in Illinois, all funding came from local property taxes, which is great if you live in a really rich area where property taxes are expensive. But if you live in a place like the Shawnee National Forest, where trees provide life-giving oxygen, but not tax dollars, your schools don't tend to be as well funded, right? So EBF was kind of a game changer there. Currently in Illinois, we are revisiting the Illinois Equity Continuum and Summative Designation process, which is basically determining how do we measure whether a school is successful or not. And we're also looking at expanding early childhood education. There's actually an entire Illinois department being made for early childhood education now, which is good because that's extremely important and it's been a very overlooked section of education. So is there still room for improvement? Absolutely. For example, we don't have universal pre-K in Illinois, right? You are not necessarily guaranteed the right to a pre-K education, despite the fact that we have evidence that shows that pre-K is so important. For example, in the community I live in, Vienna, right? There was no room for my son in pre-K. So I have to drive them up to a neighboring school to go to pre-K instead, which I'm perfectly fine with. But I'm lucky that I have the ability to do that, right? If you're looking for millennial equity, I'm only able to do that because no one's going to fire me at work if I'm technically like 6 minutes late every day because I drop my kid off at pre-K because I can't, get him to the pre-K that's next door to the high school. I wouldn't have that luxury, though, if I weren't working particularly in this place. So, until we really have accessibility to all of this for everyone, we've still got ways to go. But we have come a long way since the original Boston Latin School that only served, young white boys instead. So, like I said, have we succeeded in making things equal? They're equaler than they were. We've still got a ways to go, but we still do need to learn about diversity in schools and society, even though things are a whole lot more equaler than they were before. And equaler is not a word. You can just go ahead and judge me. I am an English teacher. I know I'm wrong. But we still have work to do when it comes to making schools fully inclusive and equitable, because even if it's unintentional, oh my gosh, it's like I suddenly can't talk. Even if it's unintentional, I'm so sorry. The biases we have can greatly impact a child's education. We'll talk about this a little later in the year, but one place you can really see this is in the performance gap between boys and girls in math and English. So if you look, girls typically way outperform boys in English, and boys typically way outperform girls in math, despite the fact that there is nothing in brain science that says that either one of us is wired one way or the other. So there's something happening with that implicit level of bias. Otherwise, that wouldn't be happening, right? Or at least it wouldn't be happening consistently across the board. So your very first assignment in this class, I have this class's assignments divided up into 4 major anchor projects that kind of integrate things from each week. Your first assignment's not going to be due until the end of week 3. But I don't recommend putting it all off until week 3. That way you're not totally overwhelmed when you get to week 3. So if you open up that first assignment called Anchor Project 1, My Classroom Audit, the opening statement and the section on Practice 1, which is addressing historical inequities, you now know enough stuff to be able to do those sections. The next section will ask you about including students with who are at different levels of ability. I would wait until after week 2 to do that one, right? So they're kind of designed to build on what we do each week, but you are good to go ahead and start on that if you'd like to do so. Let me double check my planner. I do have week 3 set aside entirely for you to work on that anchor project though. So if it's easier for you to put that off until later, you will have week 3 to work on that. The only thing you have in week 3 is work on your anchor project and do a discussion board post. So there's that for you. You've got a sign up in your reflection notebook that you're going to do. Do remember that your reflection notebook is this bad boy right here that you've made yourself a copy of that I'm not technically collecting until the end. And you have a variety of different things that I wanted you to reflect on here that I hadn't talked about already. This is kind of from the introductory unit, which I should have phrased there. Whatever. We'll just leave it where it's at. So on the first one, you'll look at, and like for each one of these, you're really only looking at a paragraph, guys. Don't overthink it. You're not writing an essay for all of these. You're just writing a paragraph. And you don't have to be formal in it either. Just talk like you're talking to me, because that's ultimately what this is for. So this week, of course, you're going to look at how bias impacts education and 3 actionable steps you could take to fight bias and discrimination. Something that surprised you from Teach Us All. That's the documentary. And then, of course, Teach Us All will come up again in your discussion boards as well for this week. Italicized movie titles. And then this is the one that we're talking about right now. Okay, so we're looking at these links to articles. So going back over here, you're going to see that there are a variety of articles. Don't read them all. That would take a lot of time. Just pick 2 that sound interesting to you. Okay. And then what I want you to do is, in a healthy paragraph, tell me about something you learned from reading those 2 articles. And then I want you to connect it to something you've observed or experienced in schools from your own personal experience. So for example, if you were a girl and you feel as if you've been told not to study science because that's a boys thing, you might be interested in this article, right? If you've had an IEP, or you know someone who has had an IEP and people have had low expectations of them traditionally, this might be interesting to you. So you can kind of look through and pick what is interesting to you. Again, you only have to read 2 of them. You'll tell me what ones you read, tell me what you learned, and then tell me, how does this fit, if you will, with what you've experienced in school as a student yourself? And that can be at any level. You can talk about your elementary experiences, your high school experiences, your college experiences, whatever works, right? So I try to put a variety of things on there so that you could hopefully find something that's interesting to you. As always, there's my sources, because I spent too long being an English teacher to not cite my sources as I go. And without further ado, that ends lesson 1 for you all. So like I said, you've got those little 3 discussion things, or those 3 reflection things to do in your reflection log. You've got your discussion board for this week. There is a very, very short form that I'll have you fill out. That's called like the Getting to Know Me form. Easiest 10 points you're ever going to get in your life. It's basically an introduction to you. That way I know a little bit about you. And then if you want to start looking at anchor project number 1, you're more than welcome to. Although if you would rather kind of put that off until week 3, that is not when it's not due until week 3. So you've got plenty of time. I think that's it. As always, if you've got questions or you want to, share your thoughts on anything, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I do love hearing from you. Cross my heart, promise. I'm not just saying that. And I'm looking forward to hearing from you and seeing the work that you turn in this week. So I kept thinking that I was going to come up with a cool ending here, but I don't have one. So bye.